Sam Raimi has a new film out called Send Help. This is the guy who gave us the Evil Dead films. He also gave us the original Spider-Man trilogy starring Tobey Maguire. He also gave us that film that was released in 2009 called Drag Me to Hell, a horror film that had strong comedic elements to it. But since then, he hasn't done a lot of directing. He's produced a heck of a lot of films. He's produced more films than he has directed. But he's gave us a couple of titles since then. In 2013, he directed Oz the Great and Powerful. In 2022, he gave us Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now, this new film, it doesn't handle existing IP. It's instead an original story brought to our screens that somewhat returns the filmmaker to his horror roots. Now, that might seem like a big deal on paper, but is it the case when you watch the film? Sadly not. It feels like a job that was done for cash, rather than a film that Sam Raimi was passionate about and desperate to get back onto our screens. It's very reminiscent of the time where Mel Gibson brought out a film called Flight Risk, which was released last year. Everyone gets excited because a respectful director returns in the director's chair. Haven't had a film from the individual in a while. We sit down, and Flight Risk is unfortunately a very poor film that feels as though a minimum amount of effort went to it. And the only conclusion you can make with these types of films is that their job's done for cash. There were elements of Flight Risk that were so poor that it was actually a bit comical, which I'm sure wasn't the intention. But thankfully, Send Help isn't that bad. So our story centers on a character played by Rachel McAdams, who is an annoying assistant, very socially awkward, and she's working under a boss played by Dylan O'Brien. The pair don't get along. He thinks she's a bit of a freak. They're on a business flight, which ends up crashing. The only two survivors of the flight being Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien's character. They end up on a remote island where they're forced to try and survive together. Here we see the power dynamics shift significantly. Now, does this sound familiar? Well, kind of. It's basically a poor man's triangle of sadness. A film about a bunch of rich folk holidaying on a yacht that ends up sinking due to an explosion, with the remaining guests and crew ending up on a remote island where the dynamics of power shift from the rich to the poor as the yacht's head cleaning lady finds herself at the top of the food chain. Triangle of Sadness's main focus is on class, whereas Send Help focuses on power and rank. Although similar plots, Send Help removes the thinking of Triangle of Sadness, straying away from presenting itself as an intellectual work and instead making its themes easy to digest for anyone who engages with it. Now, the main point isn't how much Send Help compares to Triangle of Sadness, but rather its potential to witness the satisfying return of Sam Raimi's signature horror elements. Sadly, it doesn't satisfy. Although there is gore in the film, it all appears to be CGI. If any of it was generated by practical effects, it sure didn't look like it was. Going back to the comparison of Mel Gibson's Flight Risk, it feels like this was tackled with minimal effort. But again, this film isn't as bad as Flight Risk. The gore can be fun at times and provoke some laughs, but it's not enough to distract from the overwhelming feeling of mediocrity. Saying that, the story does pick up in the third act. The plot slightly improves, with some minor surprises, making it slightly more interesting. There is some laughs, but it's not enough to salvage the film as a whole. The ending has a tone that feels as though it's giving you a cheeky wink, which personally I don't like. It feels a bit cheap, a bit like everything else that's went before it. It's easy to get excited when a respectful filmmaker returns to the director's chair after a long period of absence. I'm guilty of it myself. I was very excited to learn that Catherine Bigelow would be returning with a new film called A House of Dynamite. But when you watch that film, you realise it's unlike anything she's done before. It certainly didn't feel as though this was a work that was delivered by the same woman who brought us Zero Dark 30 on The Hurt Locker. It instead feels like a Saturday night Netflix film that the whole family would gather around to watch after nipping down to the local supermarket and getting their hands on the cheapest brand of popcorn they come across. The reminder here is to not get too hasty with developing high expectations on the return of these filmmakers. There's maybe a good reason why they've been absent for so long. And when they do return, don't expect them to have the same skill set quality that they held when they were deep in their game.